project, and don't worry, I'll take care of him. And that's pretty well what she tried to do for quite a number of years. Finally, actually, she succeeded to a fairly large extent. Because they all knew that he was a hothead, they all knew that he wasn't terribly disciplined, they all knew that he was very arrogant, they all knew and so and so. But she could handle him. And everybody knew that she could. And what's more, he did defer to her. He never really argued with her. He would argue with everybody. He would scream and roar at his brother. He would scream and roar at Tom, Black Tom, and all the rest of it. But he was always very gentle with Eleanor. She had great calming influence over him. And she used that to try to persuade the Queen. She was more successful with Lord Burleigh, Cecil, and all of those guys because they could understand that made a lot of sense. You know, put him in the charge of Eleanor, who was a much smarter woman and much more controlled woman, and so on. But that's where it gets complicated because Black Tom really hated Garrett, and every time that Eleanor would get a little nose ahead with Elizabeth and it was looking good, Black Tom would come in and say, "Don't you believe it?" And he would undo everything that she had done, and have Elizabeth back saying, "Yeah, throw him back into a lower dungeon," you know. So this went on for some time, but Elizabeth was a notorious skinflint. She was obsessed with money, or the lack of it. She was extremely. The one thing that would drive her into rages was not a victory or a loss, but how much money did you spend? How much money of my money did you spend? She executed guys for what she considered to have spent more money than they should have. Talk about budgeting. We should have that around here. You go over budget, you're dead. Off with your head. The fact is that it was costing the Queen a lot of money to keep him in the tower. And Eleanor had no money, so she chose to go in and be in there with him.
How much money does it cost to keep someone in a tower?
Well, you see, I don't know, but good question. Well, he had no clothes. I mean, he was threadbare and ill from lack of nutrition and so on. But it's more a question, how skinflint was she? But she bitched and complained and moaned constantly about how much money it was costing her to keep him in prison. But if she had executed him, she would almost certainly have precipitated the one thing that they all feared more than everything else, that they would unite the Irish chieftains, the O'Neills, the O'Donnells, the O'Connors, Clanrickard, the Desmond. They would all unite and really become very powerful. And in a way I wish she had, because that would have happened. But they were very clever and they didn't fall into that trap. Because begs the obvious question, why didn't you just cut his head off? You know, why didn't you just execute him, as they so often did? But there was many reasons why they didn't. They had friends in Europe, and also it's a measure of how incredibly high up in the aristocratic hierarchy or chain the Fitzgeralds were considered in Europe as a whole. So it would have been a crime against the aristocracy to have assassinated, killed, executed, whatever you want to call it, one of their own. And which is also the reason that she hesitated as long as she did to execute Mary Queen of Scots. A very high price attached to doing that. Anyway, what she did was she foisted him on one of her subjects, I've forgotten his name now, Lord something or other, who had a palace down in Kent, and she put the Desmonds in his charge and almost bankrupted him. And that was a very clever move on her part. Somebody that wasn't in favour, and say, "Oh, here, I want you to be my jailer," kind of thing. Now he's allowed to go out horse riding and hawking and stuff, but he's still your prisoner. Anyway, he did recover. They both recovered for a little while in the beautiful countryside of Kent. Kent is a beautiful, beautiful. You've been there, have you? It's the garden county of England. Kent. It's absolutely beautiful county. So they would have had a nice time there during the summer of whatever. But he brought them up to his townhouse just east of London Bridge, in the worst part of London you could possibly imagine. I mean, just horrible. There would have been abattoirs where they would have been killing cattle out here. There would have been taverns and whorehouses and every conceivable kind of nastiness. You imagine now how important you guys are. That was Mikey Geary, and I didn't take the call. So you guys are impotent. But it was during that period that she had her son. Now that tells you a lot.
What else didn't she have? The 3 daughters, where were they?
Oh, they were back in Kiltynan, back in Tipperary.
With other relatives.
Yeah, in the home where she was born, in the home castle. And while they probably were in dire straits, at least they were not constrained, as to use the word of the time. Their liberty was not constrained. But in this townhouse,
Like your permanent guest that doesn't get to leave.
exactly. And that you're under obligation to the Queen to make sure that he doesn't leave, and make sure that he doesn't die at the same time. So that little son probably was conceived either in the castle, well, who knows. But anyway, it's interesting that, and that by the way has intrigued historians, that, and the point has been made, that while the Earl was considered at the time to be in his extremities. I mean, he was hardly able to stand. He had suffered greatly in the damp prison of the castle, and somehow she had sustained him. And not only that, but he had somehow rallied and fathered a son. No, it's a genuine historical. Well, yeah, and it speaks to the extraordinary resilience of both of them, and the fact that.
Sorry, how long was he in jail?
6 years.
Well, between various, yes, a total of 6 years.
Probably in irons.
Perhaps not in irons, but in sleeping literally on a wet stone floor. In the most appalling, we cannot even conceive of the conditions that those people lived in. Even in luxury would have been abominable to us. Even their luxuries would be appalling conditions to us. So it's impossible to imagine the conditions that they would have lived in. And the hovel that they lived in this small apartment on the foggy banks of the Thames, incidentally, right opposite the Tower of London, so that he could remind him of his years in there when they would literally look out, and if you've ever lived in London, you know what I mean. If you can see the river a few hundred yards away, it's a good day. It's a nice, bright, clear day. The visibility in London is very often almost nil. Foggy London is by no means an overstatement. Anyway, that son was born there, and under very bad circumstances. And Eleanor did very well to survive it, and was sick for quite some time. And when finally, just to cut quick, they did, and essentially what Desmond did was he basically caved in, and he basically signed everything, and he basically just signed over everything. He was pretty well, at the end of his tether, and they expected to be assassinated any minute, and even on the ship that they were going to be brought back on, they didn't want to leave London and go round. They actually escaped and took off, but they were captured again at Bristol and was taken on a ship. They were terrified of their lives that they were being released in order to be killed. But an interesting thing happened. The little son was 2 years old. And Eleanor actually asked the Queen to take charge of him, because she knew that it would be touch and go bringing him back, and he probably wouldn't survive. And it's very interesting too that it gave both Garrett and her and Eleanor almost another reason to live, because now they had a son. And they were also terrified that Sir John, who was Garrett's brother, and of course Black Tom and so on,